Good evening. Yaakov Katz here, Senior Fellow at JPPI, and joined this evening by Gil Troy, my colleague, as well as Talia Deckel-Fleissig, who is the CEO of the Jerusalem Press Club. Talia is here. Great. We are going to be talking today about Hasbara, public diplomacy, hot topic, one of the hot button issues of the current war that's ongoing between Israel and Hamas. As we speak, lots happening on the ground, obviously, inside Gaza. IDF continues to surround Gaza City and to push further in, with lots of questions of the next steps and what will happen as that ground offensive continues. Also, just about an hour ago, a large barrage of rocket fire from the north that went to just north of Haifa. Hamas took responsibility for that. Will be interesting to see how that plays out and whether that draws the north into a larger part of this conflict. But today's focus is going to be more about the storytelling behind the war and whether Israel has been doing an effective job. Always a big question and always a big issue. I spoke earlier with Ella Kenan. Ella is a travel blogger and found herself on October 7th, and as she explains, an officer and a veteran of IDF military intelligence, I think Shmona Matayim, A200, an Arabic speaker, found herself as the war broke out thinking, what can she do? And felt that there was a vacuum. And as she started to operate and start to get out her own messaging, what she discovered was that there was a quick slogan that could potentially go viral, and that was Hamas is ISIS. And she pretty much, is she the copywriter? Is she the one who came up with the slogan? That I'll leave for other people to debate, but she has largely been credited with that slogan, which has been very effective, I think, for Israel in getting its message across to an international audience of what exactly it is dealing with here with this enemy in the Gaza Strip. So here's the interview with Ella Kenan, and then we're going to have an interesting discussion with Gil and with Talia.
Yes.
Ella Kenan, thank you so much for joining JPPI in our webinar. You came into the headlines and I guess into the national awareness in Israel because usually you run a travel blog called Ella's Travel. But you got right away involved in what we can call, I guess, Israel's Hasbara campaign, the public diplomatic side of the war. And pretty much you were the one, if I'm not mistaken, who came up with the idea of Hamas equals ISIS. So first of all, tell us the story. How did this happen? Where did it come from? How did this all begin for you?
Okay, great. So the first 24 hours of the massacre of October 7th, I think I was pretty much in shock and full of anxiety, like a lot of us. And I wasn't really functioning. I was super afraid of, maybe the terrorists ran away and they could manage to go north and get to my neighborhood. And on Sunday, I was sure that when I'm going to get into social media, then I'll see international support, because this is a massacre. This is a thing of good and bad. It's not a matter of like complexities and, intricacy. It's not that, but I was amazed, or maybe, when looking at it now, I shouldn't be amazed that there wasn't any support or enough support in Israel. There was a lot of people, people that were very highly educated and liberal that said, they had it coming. It's because of the occupation. And I was like, no, there's no occupation in Gaza, and you don't rape women and behead people because of an occupation. That has nothing to do with that. And I've seen there was a gap in terms of, explaining what happened and communicating what we were experiencing internationally. Now, I want to just maybe give a really, really short background. My background is that I was for 7 years in the intelligence corps, in the IDF. I'm a captain in reserves. And so
you have background on the military side of Hamas, I would say.
And the geopolitically background of and I also know Arabic, I speak Arabic, I read Arabic. It's not something that is foreign to me. Apart from that, I'm also working in digital marketing for the past 7 years. That's what I'm doing next to my blog. So I have the background, the technical background on how social media works and how things go viral and how things, get out of control and get viral internationally. And the last thing is that I'm also an influencer. So I know how it works. I just know how content works. Now, in the tourism industry, for example, if you'll see a tourism ad for Thailand, and it will be the Thailand Ministry of Tourism posting about it, and it will be on the news, not on the news, like on commercials, and you will see how beautiful is Thailand, and Thailand is calling you for a vacation. Or you could go into my Instagram or any other travel influencer Instagram, and you can see a short video of 2 minutes, and I'm going to talk in this video, and I'm going to show you, look, I'm here in Thailand, and this is what I'm doing, and oh my God, I'm drinking this shake, and it's amazing, and we're at this party, and look at the hotel, and you're talking about the weather, and the people, and the food, and everything, and it's me, and it doesn't look professional. It's not with the drone, or a commercial. It's very,
but it's authentic.
Exactly. So 9 of 10 people would probably take my word for that rather than the commercial. So I did that just in terms of hasbara, because when you're looking,
you gave authentic organic hasbara, but tell me when
the ISIS, the Hamas's ISIS,
the Hamas ISIS thing.
Okay, so I wrote it on Sunday on a few posts. But I didn't organize that into a narrative or a hashtag. I just wrote it in a few posts, and I've seen people internationally reacting to that. So I was looking at the analytics, and I'm saying, okay, that's interesting. So because I know how social media works, so I wrote a really long post in Hebrew saying, okay, this should be our narrative, and we haven't, under the most horrible circumstances, we have the opportunity to reframe everything we knew until now and do it create a good versus bad, which is completely true, by the way. I completely believe in that. And we can use the hashtag Hamas is ISIS. Now, if it will go viral, then that's it. The problem is most things don't go viral. So I asked people, if you just follow my instructions and collaborate and cooperate with me, maybe we could do that. And people did. I don't know, I guess that was my luck. And I think that that's what made it really get out of the echo chamber, the Israeli Jewish echo chamber, which already supports Israel and doesn't need hasbara. And I think that 90% of what we're doing up until October 7th and also after is not, it stays in the echo chamber, but then we saw it became viral around the world. So that's more or less the story.
So, first of all, kol hakavod. That message has obviously caught on, and it's been extremely effective and extremely important because it also brings it to the international community, which knows ISIS, but less knows Hamas. And so that was very effective in that sense. It created it gave people who don't know what we're going through a common denominator of sorts. But where is the government? Right? This is something that always troubles me. I've been in this space for a long time as well. Why can't Israel get it together? And now that you have been very active here, and I saw, you were in some interviews and you were saying, it's not a lot of money. There's some, where's the money? Where's the funding? Why are we not seeing Hamas is ISIS all over billboards around the world that Israel should be funding, not private philanthropists? How do you diagnose the problem?
Okay, so I think that if I'm thinking on the past month, I'm reviewing the past month we've been over, then I think that the government is doomed to fail anyway, because we're dealing with a terrorist organization that branded itself as, how do they say, freedom fighter.
Freedom fighter, liberation.
Freedom fighters, exactly. That's what they were doing. They were branding themselves. Now, as a country, as a system, you can never compete with a freedom fighting organization. That will never work. The only thing that is going to work is when a civil project taken by tens of thousands, maybe more than 100,000 people, could actually make a difference, because it's authentic, it's real, it's down to earth. It's not me as the IDF spokesman. Now, I don't want to say anything. I think Daniel Agari, the IDF spokesman, does an amazing job. I think we can't expect him to do a different job. It will never work. And a lot of the Hasbara videos that I see, it's like, looks like a movie trailer in the cinema, and like with the dramatic music, and it's super professional, but
it's too engineered, is what you're saying. It's not authentic.
It doesn't drive compassion. If I was to be a North American or a European, then I would look at that and say, well, those people seem really strong and really advanced, and the world in 2023 doesn't like people that are too successful, God forbid, look white. I don't look white, but a lot of Israelis do. They are white passing. I hate to even say that. I hate that this is even the talk at the moment, but nobody likes a minority that actually succeeds, like the Israelis. And again, we get a lot of comments from the international community, and a lot of us are saying, it's like the strong, rich white people against the oppressed. Now, it's really funny, because 100 years ago, Jews couldn't go into country clubs, or they had quotas in universities in the United States because they weren't even considered white. And now suddenly the Israelis and the Jews are these white Europeans. The
privileged. Yeah.
Yes, they tried to eradicate us less than 20 years ago, and then less than 80 years ago, because we weren't white. And they're not even talking about Sephardic Jews like me, or Mizrahi Jews, which we have nothing to do with that. Our background is Arabic. So that is the war that we're now waging. And what the difference is that we don't try to make it professional. Us Israelis, we're always like, we want to go a bit, startup nation. And all the education that we got at home, that you need to thrive and you need to go forward and try your best, that is not the way it works. The other side.
No, there's something unique in this country, no doubt, of people like yourself, people who come from the bottom, who just adapt and come up with creative ideas that catch on. My last question to you, Ella, is this going to be a shift in career? Do you see yourself maybe continuing with this moving forward, or too far away to even think about that?
It's too far, but I know that during the next, 3 months, for sure, that's what I'm going to do. And we're starting to see really good results. And I don't know what will be the day after. I just know that we've onto something, and I wouldn't want to see that thrown to the garbage. And in terms of government, maybe this thing shouldn't be sponsored by the government. Maybe the fact that we can say whatever we want and talk about only Israeli interests, and not, when you have something sponsored by the government, they want you to say, you can't say this, you can't say that. I don't want that. I want complete freedom as a Israeli citizen. So
freedom and authenticity are very important. I totally agree. Well, Ella Kenan from Ella's Travel, who is now, I guess, the copywriter of Hamas is ISIS. Thank you very much for everything you've done on behalf of Israel, and just thank you for being with us at JPPI today.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
Okay. Hasbara, Gil and Talia. So Gil, I'm sure has a lot to say about this. Talia, let me just do a quick intro. Talia, we actually used to be colleagues many years ago at the Jerusalem Post, and Talia is today the CEO of the Jerusalem Press Club, which is basically an independent press association of sorts, mostly for foreign journalists based here in Jerusalem, that helps to facilitate informative seminars, webinars, educational experiences, tours, down south now, and things along those lines, but works very closely, especially with the foreign press. So we have the opportunity to kind of tap into your experience, Talia, and what you've seen. I just want to say kind of one comment to maybe frame the conversation. I've long thought that Israel, when it comes to, first of all, I never liked the word Hasbara, but that's a separate issue. But I try to call it public diplomacy, because I think that's an important, integral part of the conflict. And I think that one of the things that like we've learned over the years here in this country is we have a battlefield in Gaza. Fine. We've learned over time with missiles and rockets that are fired at us that there's also something called the home front. So we develop systems. We have a mamad, a protective space in our homes, or a bomb shelter. We created Iron Dome, David Sling, Arrow 2, Arrow 3 for missile interception systems to protect our cities. But then we have a third front to every conflict, which is called the public diplomacy front. And the third front, you basically have Dover Tzahal, the IDF spokesperson's office, which becomes the strategic arm of any strategic messaging that comes out of the country. Now, is it right for the government to have the IDF spokesperson always being the one who's briefing, who's talking? I don't know. Like we kind of, I've long thought that we lack the planning ahead of time. What is going to be our messaging? Why do we need someone like Ella, who's done a great job, right? Kol hakavod. But why is this not prepared ahead of time? Why are we racing and improvising and adapting as we move along, and we don't have the Iron Dome for public diplomacy in place? And it seems that the whole system, in my eyes, to a large extent, is a bit broken. So, Talia, that's my kind of opening comment. Do with it what you'd like. But I'm curious to kind of see, you maybe share with us kind of the way you view it, but also, what are the challenges that you're facing maybe a little more specifically with the foreign press that I know you're talking with all the days. So give us kind of your firsthand experience.
Okay, so first of all, Yaakov, thank you so much for inviting me to speak. And it has been quite some time since we worked together in Israel's previous war, actually, in the Second Lebanon War is exactly when you and I met. It's a very loaded question that you ask. It's something that I find myself dealing with. I've been dealing with it for years. Does civil society need to be the one explaining what Israel is doing? Does it need to be coming from the government? I find what Ella said very true in that the more the messaging comes from the people, then the more credibility it has. On the other hand, the government is the one that controls the information. You can have thousands and thousands of volunteers, but at the end of the day, I don't know how many rockets were fired at civilians. I don't know how many civilians are dead. I don't know the facts and figures. And that is something that we need to figure out a better way to connect between. We need to meet somewhere in the middle in terms of collecting the information from the person that controls the information and handing it off to civil society in order to disseminate that information. And that's something that we have a challenge, not just during wartime, but also during routine. And I think there are a lot of very sophisticated and well-meaning people that are trying to coordinate these efforts during routine. I can't tell you how much money has gone into trying to get everybody on the same page, at least in terms of collaborating, and it hasn't worked. And I think that's the reason that also we find ourselves in an emergency situation, also kind of, just banging on walls and not really understanding where to go forward. Is there a solution to this coordination? I'm not sure. I think at the end of the day, we have to realize that we can do the best we can from our position. The multiple ministries dealing with it on their ends will have to do it the best that they can and try to meet somewhere in the middle. And in terms of the challenges working with the press itself, I mean, I have a lot. I can probably focus on three main challenges we've been dealing with since 10/7. And I think the first one, I'll do it chronologically. The first issue that we dealt with, and that I know that people in newsrooms as well, was the whole issue of having to find proof, having to show the world what really happened in order to convince them that it actually did, because we're talking about atrocities that are just so beyond the comprehension of any human heart and mind, that people wanted to see evidence. Are they demanding more evidence from Israel than they would from the other side? That's a question that needs to be asked. And we found ourselves in the same, in the same predicament that I guess the security and health echelon and anyone dealing with the situation dealt with, and that is, do we show these pictures? Do we show the bodies? Do we show what we need to show in order to prove to the world that this really happened? And it took the government a long time to come to the realization that, yes, we do need to be showing them that this is what happened in order to convince them. And I will say that at least the GPO, which might have taken a little bit longer than it should, finally came to that conclusion and did really the best thing that it could have done in the situation, and did the screenings of the horrible.
So I want to talk about the screening, but one thing that you did remind me of, you were talking about the data and the information. And by the way, what I think sometimes people don't also fully understand is that the reason that the IDF plays such an outsized role in conflict, especially when it comes to the communication side, is because they are the ones who control the information, right? And over my career as a writer, I've done so many deep dives into so many of these failures and mismanagement of that data or that video. Like if you go back to 2010 in the Mavi Marmara, the Turkish flotilla, and we all know that famous video of the Israeli commandos fast roping down to the deck, and then they get ambushed and beaten. And it happened at 4:30 in the morning was when the commandos boarded the ship. The video was only released 12 hours later, after the whole world had already kind of galvanized around the narrative of Israel kills 9 Turkish peace activists, right? And why did that video not come out? Because someone in the Navy said, I cannot have my commandos look bad. And you could jump to the AP building in 2021, when we did not explain why did we just bomb the Al Jala building in Gaza, and not explain AP was there, the greatest, the biggest news organization in the world, American. Why are we not giving evidence of what we claimed was in that building? We're just saying it's a Hamas military target. It took us a month to say that it had some. So there's that information. I think, by the way, in this war so far, we've seen maybe an improvement there. The hospital situation was a good example of where right away they have done a better job. I do want to talk about the video, but before we go to the video, Gil, I want to ask you a question about the politicization of communications and of the public diplomacy. One of the things that I've long thought, and tell me if you agree, you have a different idea, is, people don't understand completely, because of our political system, that our transportation minister will talk about Hamas in Gaza, right? Now, the transportation secretary in the United States of America will talk about Hamas. Joe Biden fires the guy, right? They have no relevance to the discussion. There's a clear national security team. They're the people who talk about it. But here, every person can do whatever they want. So there's no discipline. And it's very difficult to do what Talia was talking about, which is coordination, when you have such a highly politicized environment.
I was going to joke that America's transportation secretary is on parental leave, but we'll put that aside. You're right there. I mean, Israelis are famously undisciplined, and so much of it is about politics. But let's take a step back first, and let's acknowledge that Israel is swimming in a poisoned sea. If on October 7th, thousands of marauders, and everybody's just talking about the Hamas marauders, but there was that second wave of Palestinian Gazans, which is really important to emphasize, came in and raped and pillaged and plundered and did unspeakable things. And until we actually ran these rape and snuff videos, which many people had already seen, it wasn't believed. B, at enlightened places like Harvard, it still didn't make us innocent victims, but influencers started talking about baby settlers and justifying all kinds of horrific crimes. We have to realize that there are many, many people who, no matter what we do, no matter what we say, no matter how brilliant our influencers are or our government leaders are, will just not believe us. And I actually think we spend far too much time and far too much energy on those people. And one of the things I'm hoping for from the cataclysm of October 7th is that we're going to just stop focusing on them. In the Jewish world, I think the pre-October 7th, the 17%, because 83% consistently saying I'm pro-Israel, but the Peter Beinarts, the JPPIs, the INNs were running the conversation. That has to stop. And in the outside world, we have to stop being so defensive. We have to stop being so worried that there are some people who hate us, because you know what? There are some people who hate us. Nevertheless, there is this broader question of how do we manage this story? And it's really interesting, listening to your back and forth, Yaakov and Talia, because there are really two dimensions. One is just simple facts, right? And I agree with you that in this war, the IDF has been better at getting out some of those simple facts. And I frankly look at the whole story of the hospital as a double win for us. First of all, we saw how quickly so many people were willing to put professional credibility aside to simply jump on the train. And again, the people who hate us still believe that the hospital was bombed and 500 people died. But most people said, hey, wait a minute. We're buying into this Hamas narrative. And so within 2 days, I'm going to say long-term, but really within 2 days, because everybody's in instant, we might have lost the first hour, 2, 3 of that information war, but within a day or two, it did create a different balance in the story. And that was because the IDF was effective in getting out the information.
But it was also because they were fast, Gil.
They were fast, right? They were
which
fast.
Is usually, unfortunately, if we look back at prior examples in history, and not so, and quite recent history, they're not fast. That's
right, and I think they learned, right? So I think they've learned from their mistakes. So one dimension is the information, and the second dimension, going back to our influencer Ella Kenan at the beginning, is the spin. And I actually think the less we rely on the government to give spin, the better we are. The United States of America has an elaborate governmental system. And when the United States was in the Gulf War, there were certain spokespeople who were well known as explaining what the military was doing, but they weren't kind of justifying America. Right. The degree to which we feel like we have to be justifying Israel shows a kind of bit of a almost galuti kind of exilic mentality. It also frankly shows the fact that we're very, very small and we depend on American goodwill. So I don't want to dismiss that, but I just want to say that we have to think about it in more dimensions. And frankly, as someone who's never taken a dollar or shekel of government money to do what I do, write articles, explain, it gives me a freedom. I was on Canadian CBC the other day, and they were trying to nail me on, what the government, what Benjamin Netanyahu governments did, and I said, hey, you know what? I'm an independent guy, and I could see the interview right. Going in one way because I was defending Israel's right to defend itself against Hamas. They were setting me up as sort of like this government spokesperson, and the fact that I could say, you know what? I'm a critic of that government. I think they're not functioning in this way. Gave it tremendous freedom. So sometimes the chaos can be good, especially because the chaos exists.
Yeah. It kind of reminds me when the war broke out around October 7th, and I started to do a lot of media interviews on TV. I was asked at one point by a few people in Dovert Tzahal, the audio spokesperson, if I would want to come on and enlist. And my answer was similar to what you just said, which is I need my freedom to say what I feel. I can't just, but that's personal. And the people who are doing that are amazing. Peter Lerner, who we've had on the webinar, and Conricus and Richard Hecht and other people are doing an incredible job, literally incredible job. Talia, I want to go back to you for a moment. Just talking about this video and the 47-minute one that is supposed to be horrific, which we saw the Knesset members walk out of. Israel for now has been only doing some private showings, screenings for members of Knesset, for some members of media, diplomats, and the likes. There's apparently a discussion that's ongoing within the government of showing that of releasing maybe all of it, part of it, to the wider world. And there was a report today I saw in Yediot Ahronot about that. I'm curious I don't know if you've seen it. I have not, but I'm curious I feel like I've seen enough with what's come out already, but I'm curious what your thoughts are, if that would have still value for Israel in its attempts to continue to get some more legitimacy and credibility for what it's trying to achieve.
Well, look, I think there's obviously value to doing something as quickly as possible, like we already said, in order to prevent further misinformation from getting out. But are we still showing the atrocities of the Holocaust after so many decades? Are we still convincing people that the Holocaust happened and teaching the next generation that this happened, showing them, footage, taking them to Auschwitz and and teaching them. Sorry for the screaming in the background. Not sure if you can hear it, but if we are still finding ourselves needing to prove to the world that a Holocaust happened, then chances are we're still going to need to prove that this story happened in 10, 20, 30, 40 years. So yes, I think the answer is we need to continue the screenings. I'm not sure that they have to, take the same form as they have up until now. And you touched on an important point that other footage was available over the couple of weeks before they released it. At JPC, we also, we did our best to disseminate whatever we knew to be we knew to be accredited. Unfortunately, in order to send those out to our members, then I myself had to make sure that we knew what we were sending. So yes, I was also exposed. And yeah, I think the bottom line is we're going to have to keep proving it over and over again. I do want to connect to what Gil was saying, though, in terms of the audience itself. I absolutely agree that there are going to be those people who, doesn't matter how many dead bodies they see, they're still not going to be convinced. They want to hate Israel. They want to hate the Jews. They're going to organize protests and shout from the river to the sea and everything. But I think that we don't have the privilege of giving up on large segments of society. We can see how this misinformation, and even with the hospital in Gaza, despite the fact that the proof came out within the hour, the IDF sent out the recording of the two Hamas operatives saying that it wasn't an Israeli missile. Even when that came out, and despite the corrections that were made by the leading papers and networks that had adopted the Hamas narrative, we still saw, all of the anti-Semitism across the world. We saw the airplane being attacked in Russia, and I think that we don't have the privilege to say, okay, let's put a large amount of people aside and focus only on those who might believe us, because how do we know who might believe us? I mean, we could do polling, we could spend thousands of dollars trying to track who the people that we need to focus on are, but I just don't think that we have the time to sit back and look at this as like a long strategic process.
No, I tend to agree with you, but I think that also, there's two elements that, sadly, coming very recently from a big media company, the media fails to recognize the responsibility that it carries with it, right? So like even what you just said, Talia, you report on the hospital and you just adopt the Hamas narrative as is without questioning it, which, by the way, is ridiculous in of itself, right? They're willing to just report verbatim what Hamas says, but when the IDF or the Israeli democratically elected government says it, they're like, well, we can't verify that this is what Israel says. But they will accept Hamas, but not Israel. But it has a direct impact and leads potentially directly to violence, right? And I think the media doesn't fully grasp what exactly what role it's playing here, and how this can lead to death and life, life and death situations. Gil, one of the things that has come up often over the years, and by the way, Talia mentioned before, the 2006 Second Lebanon War was a decision by the Israeli cabinet in the wake of the war, in the aftermath, to establish what became known as the Mate Hasbara Leumi, the National Information Directorate. That was an outcome of the Second Lebanon War. And that was meant to be that coordinator of sorts within the Israeli government that was going to bring everyone together and coordinate and make sure there's messaging and everyone's on the same page. Hasn't been always the most effective. Do you think that maybe it's time for the Hasbara Czar to be established here in Israel? I hate the information minister. It sounds like out of Syria or North Korea, right? Those are the kind of countries that have that type of minister. But maybe it's time we made order here.
So first, let me just go back to something that Talia said. What I was trying to say was I think we let the extremists run the conversation. I agree with you that there's a vast middle. and we have to speak to what I call the silenced majority. But we do that more effectively not by being defensive and not by letting the extremists run the conversation. And that's where the battle is among the 84% Americans who immediately supported Israel, and now that number is dragging down. And we've got but the 16%, let's call them, the fanatics are the ones who I think we spend way too much time focusing on. So that's one thing. Look, I think that in a healthy political system, and again, we have to start thinking about the day after, we would call the Hasbara the foreign minister. Abba Eban, right, was an amazing spokesperson, both when he was UN ambassador, but also when he was foreign minister, when he was the voice of Israel. I think we have to start looking at, and this goes back to what you were saying earlier about, the transportation minister. We have to stop giving out these cabinet ministries as little goodies, for after a 5-year-old's birthday party, and looking at them as only giving it out to people who were really effective. Part of my frustration with Yair Lapid's not going into the unity government is that I think that he could have been an effective voice explaining Israel, and it would have been very good for his career, but also would have been very good for the Jewish people because he has that skill set to kind of explain. So I want a foreign minister, and sometimes we've had prime ministers who took on that role. Think of Golda Meir. Menachem Begin liked to do that, sometimes for better and sometimes for worse. So,
what have you thought of Naftali Bennett and what he's been trying to do?
I think Naftali Bennett, and again, I think the fact that he's been independent has been very, very important. And on two levels. One is I think he has given, and I've seen it the way his, when he stands up to the BBC or Sky News, the way it gets forwarded here in Israel, it gives people what we call in Hebrew chizuk. It gives them a strength. It gives them, wow, there's somebody standing up for us, which is part of the information war. One of the things I'm most worried about here is the despair that's spreading through Israel. And when he does that, people go, go for it. So I think that's very important. But I also think that when we have an effective, and let's be honest, there were many years where Bibi Netanyahu was the effective voice of Israel. The problem was he became addicted to believing his old press releases and didn't update his messaging or realize that things had changed. So I think one of the things in the day after we have to start thinking about is how do we have leaders who know not only how to lead us, but also to speak to the rest of the world. But I'm much more comfortable with a foreign minister who's doing that than some kind of, Orwellian information czar.
We also, by the way, Gil, just a news flash, we also used to have a foreign minister who would be part of the inner war cabinet as well. But this one, for some reason, is not. By the way, just on the Bennett point, he's kind of moderated a bit. I personally, I don't like that, come and let's fight right away. It seems like he would go on BBC or Sky and just look for the fight so he can score more political points domestically, which seems to be more of what the agenda for him is in doing these interviews. But Talia, I want to finish off with one last question to you. Someone who works very closely with the media, what is it that they need? What do you find is the most effective to be able to, obviously, you're not a Hasbara organization, but what is most effective to be able to make sure that the right information and the right stories and the stories are written in the best way possible?
So first of all, I think they need to be approached in a neutral manner and not, from the get-go looked at as hostile, because I think that that's something that I'm not saying that there are members of the media that don't maybe deserve that reputation, but we have now 2,000 journalists visiting in Israel. I don't know what the numbers were in the Second Lebanon War. I don't know what the numbers were in the past, but I know that in the few years leading up to this war, numbers were sinking. There were about 300 or so boots on the ground, as you were. We have 2,000 journalists here in Israel who want to hear what Israelis are saying. They might be jumping, to other places to hear what others have to say, but we need to look at them as opportunities and not as liars from the get-go. So I think, first of all, we need to listen to what it is that they need. We need to make them feel comfortable. We need to be welcoming, and we need to be giving them as much access to credible sources that are perceived as objective and neutral as possible, with that in mind, that we are connecting them to Israelis. And that's something that we're trying to do at JPC. And really just, the access thing is so important. We spent a couple of weeks just, trying to bring them down south to see things for themselves. And there was this kind of monopoly of the area by those who control the information, and that was fine, and it was an active war zone and whatever. But the truth is that no government agency could cover these 2,000 people. Like, there was no way of them to do it by themselves, and this is another reason why this coordination and cooperation that we've been talking about this entire panel is so important. So ultimately, they need more access to sources. And Israelis also need to be very careful about who they're connecting to the press. We don't want to fall into the trap of, sending them fake footage or connecting them to a family, God forbid, that nothing actually happened to them. Like, there are enough victims of this horrible massacre to find. We need to be very careful. And I think the last thing we need to do is be hopeful and hope that they'll do right by the information that they're getting. But in addition to that, there's not much we can do. Like, yes, there are other organizations that do monitoring and, try to understand what the information, what it is that they do with the information. And I think there's a place for everybody, but that's not going to help the cause at the end of the day. They need access to correct information, and they need Israelis that are willing to help them get it.
Yeah. Very interesting. Talia Dekel-Fleissig, thank you, CEO of the Jerusalem Press Club. Thank you so much for joining us. Gil Troy, as always, great to have you with us. And thanks to all our viewers and listeners for being with us this evening. Prayers for a quiet and safe night for all. Thank you so much, and we'll be back tomorrow